Stai già facendo partire? Però
Poi
poi
posso lasciarla andare, giusto? Vado solo.
Sì, aspetta, però poi inizia perché sennò rimane lì. Ok,
Stai già facendo partire?
Adesso torna sullo Zoom. Però
Poi
poi
posso lasciarla andare, giusto? Vado solo.
Sì, aspetta, però poi inizia perché sennò rimane lì. Aspetta. Ok,
Stai già facendo partire?
Adesso torna sullo Zoom. Però
Poi posso lasciarla andare, giusto? Vado solo.
Sì, aspetta, però poi inizia perché sennò rimane lì. Aspetta, se no continua a sentirci che parliamo.
Ok, stai già facendo partire?
Adesso torna sullo Zoom.
Però
Poi
poi
posso lasciarla andare, giusto? Vado solo.
Sì, aspetta, però poi inizia. Se no continuiamo a registrarci.
Okay, welcome everyone. So welcome to all students from the Master Economic Development and International Relations, and welcome also to the PhD students in Sustainable Development and Climate Change. Just a few words about this seminar to acknowledge the sponsors who allow us to invite Ron Bosma from Utrecht, who is a very expensive guy indeed, and Eduardo Hernandez also from Utrecht. So POLIS is a Marie Curie program. It's a EU funded program, and it's in a way a PhD schools, and Eduardo is part of that. A consortium between 7 universities and 7 non-academic partners who has been lasting for about 3 years now. So today we have 2 experts in the field of global value chain and climate change. Actually, Ron is really a prominent figure in economic geography. He's professor of regional economics at Utrecht University, and he's opened up the field of so-called evolutionary economic geography, something that some of you have been also studying in your own course, and recently has been venturing into global value chain and try to bridge, let's say, between these 2 fields, global value chain and evolutionary economic geography. So I'm very glad Ron is here. And just to briefly introduce also Eduardo. Eduardo is a PhD student, halfway to finish his program, and is also embedded in this evolutionary economic field and working specifically on global value chain, and part of his thesis is connecting global value chain to climate change. So he will present some preliminary recent results of one of these the chapter of his thesis. So rules of the game, you got half an hour each. I suggest to have questions towards the end. So also for people that are connected online, welcome everyone. So if you really have pressing question for clarification, please, you can intervene directly or use the chat. But the best would be to have it towards the end. We had to finish a bit before 11 sharp because students have to move to other classes. So Ron, the floor is yours. Go ahead, please.
Yes. How do I see my slides?
Just in a second. Here you go.
Yeah, all right. Is working? Yeah. Okay, buongiorno. This is my only 2 words in Italian, so the rest I will do in English. It's better for me and also better for you. As Andrea kindly said, yeah, my name is Ron Bosma. We used to be former colleagues at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, and we have been working a lot on evolution, economic geography, and regional diversification in particular. Okay, I had some laptop problems this morning, so my presentation will be a bit different than I had in mind. But okay, don't worry. I will go through it. I will say a bit about how regions diversify over time. And if there are general patterns behind that. So we all know. Can you please move to the next slide? Yes. I will say a bit about how we can map diversification opportunities of regions, and we use two big concepts in order to do that. It's the concept of relatedness and the concept of complexity. I will say a few things on that. And then I try to say something on how that might be relevant for regions on global value change. Next slide, please. Yes, the big question is, and we have been working on already for 10, 15 years. Andrea has been involved in that, also David Rigby, who's sitting over there. And what we try to grasp is how countries and regions try to come up with new technologies, develop new industries, develop new occupations, and if we can find some kind of general pattern behind that. So what we know from many studies is that those new economic activities do not start from scratch. But they build on capabilities that are present in a region, because they condition which type of new economic activities will be feasible to develop. You cannot just move into any direction, right? So if you have no relevant capabilities in artificial intelligence, there's no way you can go and diversify into that particular technology. So that is the baseline that we apply. So local capabilities can provide opportunities, but especially they also constrain what you can do when diversifying into new economic activities. And here comes the first concept in that I briefly introduced, and that is the concept of relatedness, because what we tend to show is that regions develop activities that are very closely related to what they have already been doing in the past. And that is just to reduce uncertainty in the innovation process. Yes, next slide. And that has been referred to as related diversification. I always use this slide in order to explain a bit the essence of it. So you have region A on the left hand of the figure, right? So that is specialized in motorbikes. Then diversifies into car making, and then moves into car trucks. And as you can imagine, each time this diversification process is taking place in region A, it builds on existing capabilities that might be engineering capabilities more in general. So the capabilities that you need to master in motorbikes are still very relevant to move into car making, right? So that's why it's related diversification. It's related to what you have been doing in the past. And that is very much in contrast with unrelated diversification, because then you make jumps, right? So you here in this example in region B, it's you're specialized in textiles, then you move into aircraft making, and then you diversify into pharmaceuticals. And you can imagine each time you diversify, you have to transform the underlying capabilities in your region completely, right? Because the capabilities that you need to produce textiles are completely irrelevant to move into aircraft making. That's why these are cases of unrelated diversification, and that's why it's very rare that these things happen. They happen now and then, but it is very rare. That's what comes up. So, and here we can really, I'm trying to say something about the methodology, although you told me that I cannot really go into that too much, also given the limited amount of time, but just to get you an idea about technological diversification. So technological diversification is about the ability of regions to diversify into new technologies, right? It might be, as I said, artificial intelligence, but that can be about green. Is defining relatedness is that if two technologies share similar capabilities, They use similar inputs of knowledge. They are being defined as related. And you do that by doing co-occurrence analysis. On each patent document, you have patent clauses mentioned. So if there are 2 or more patent clauses mentioned on a patent document, and you look at hundreds of thousands or millions of patents, and you want to see, okay, how many times 2 technologies pop up on a patent document, then it cannot be a coincidence that this pair of technologies co-occurs at a high frequency on a patent document. So you define them as being related. If 2 technologies never mentioned in combination on a patent document, you define them as being unrelated. They have nothing in common, right? So that is how you do it. So you get then, you can go to the next slide. Then you can build a nice, next slide, please. Stop moving. Yes, then you can really get a nice network, right? So each node in this network stands for a technology. If 2 nodes are connected, right? So there is a link between the 2. It means that they are related above a certain threshold. So it means that they rely on similar capabilities. If there's no link between 2 nodes, they are not related. They don't share similar capabilities, and that's why they're not connected. So you see in this so-called technology space, this is the technology space in the US, which technologies are related to each other. For example, you see on the right, you see a really green cluster of technologies that are highly connected. So those are computers and communication technologies. So you expect that they cluster around in this space because they share similar capabilities, in this case, in the field of computers and communication, right? So, okay, next slide, please. And then you can really move to the regional scale, and you can use this information to see, okay, which regions, in this case in Europe, have a high score on related technologies to hydrogen technologies in this case. This is just the example of hydrogen technologies. Which regions have the highest potential to move into new hydrogen technology? It depends on to what extent they have a presence of many technologies that are related to hydrogen technology. So those technologies can really provide inputs in terms of skills, in terms of knowledge, to move into new hydrogen technologies, right? So, and you can see that there are a few regions in Europe that have a high potential to move in hydrogen technologies, but many regions in Europe do not have that, right? So as I said before in the introduction, those local capabilities, they provide opportunities for some regions to move into something new, in this case, hydrogen technologies, but many regions do not have the right set of capabilities. And that's why they will have a weak performance and show a very low potential to move into hydrogen. So if everybody, regional policymakers will tell you, we want to go into hydrogen and we want to develop the latest technologies, don't believe them. First, look at this map and whether they have a potential to do so, right? So, okay, next slide. So that was the relatedness concept. The other concept is about complexity. Well, there's a lot to say on that. I think also Eduardo will say a bit more on that, also in terms of measurement, but you just don't want to diversify into something new, right? Which would be good for a country or a region in terms of economic development. But you also want to go to a high value added economic activity, right? That is complex, that is very hard to copy or to imitate by others. If you succeed to move into those new activities, in those new technologies, then you can really benefit from that. And that can be a source of regional economic advantage, right? So you can really benefit from it economically speaking. Yeah, you can do it. Yes. Okay. So here you get then a nice, you can plot the 2 dimensions, right? Relatedness on the x-axis, complexity on the y-axis. And now I want to see for this region in which so you have industry J and industry I. In both industries, this region is not yet specialized. and it might want to target one of the two in terms of innovation policy, right? So, and then what you would prefer, of course, is to go for industry J and not for industry I, because industry J scores much higher on relatedness. So there are many more relevant capabilities present in region A to develop this industry. And industry J is more complex than industry I, so you can also get more economic benefits out of that, right? So this is how it works. Right. Now, okay, then you apply that with real data, and here I have just an example of Île-de-France, the Paris region. Here you can find again relatedness on the x-axis, complexity on the y-axis, and what you can observe. And each node stands for industries in this case. And we want to see what are the opportunities of Île-de-France to develop industries, given the capabilities that they have. And actually you see there's a positive relationship between the two, right? There's a line that goes up. So Île-de-France is very rich. Why? Because it has high opportunities to move in the most complex industries. Well, it has very low relatedness on industries that are have a very low complex intensity. So Île-de-France has many opportunities to move into the most complex one that will bring high economic benefits. That's why Île-de-France is super rich. Okay, next slide. Silesia region, a Polish region, old coal mining region, old steel region. You see a very different picture. You see here a negative relationship between relatedness and complexity, meaning that Silesia region has the highest potential to move into new industries that are at the lowest complexity level, right? So that will not bring that many economic benefits to the region. Well, if you look up there, a very low score on relatedness, but very high score on complexity. So Silesia region have very low potential to move in very complex industries. And that is just the fate, that is just the future fortune of the Silesia region, given the capabilities that it has accumulated in the past. So you see, regions differ very much in terms of the opportunities they have to diversify into something new and to diversify into low or high complex activities. And that has serious consequences for their economic development. Yes. Now I go slowly to the global value chain topic. First to say something about, okay, so far we looked at the capabilities that are present in the region. And as I said, they provide opportunities, but they set also limits to what can be achieved in this diversification process. But you can also connect to other regions, right? It's not, of course, regions collaborate with other regions, regions trade with other regions. So there are many linkages in that respect. And in the literature is always saying, well, that is very good, right? Because you have to expose yourself to other regions because to avoid a lock-in, right? Otherwise, you don't learn from other regions. And that might also have a positive effect on diversification. So you can tap also into capabilities that you don't have yourself, but that are elsewhere. And when you succeed to do so, you can still use that as an input to diversify into something new as a region. So, okay, next slide. So we have developed methodologies on that. Last night, David and me had a nice talk about whether this makes sense, this complementarity indicator, but here I just take it for granted. And we used this type of methodology. And here I have Île-de-France again, which I made dark. And I just wanted to see, okay, for hydrogen technology. So Île-de-France wants to go for hydrogen technology. It has some capabilities to do so, but it does not have all the capabilities that are needed to move into new hydrogen technology. So it should look around, right? This is Europe, right? This is the European Union. That is about identifying and exploiting complementarities that exist elsewhere. That is the whole idea about Europe, right? So here we're going to see what Europe can mean to Île-de-France in order to develop new hydrogen technology. And as you can see, and Macron was very pleased with this type of figure because there are many French regions that can offer complementary capabilities, like Ronald and well, I forgot about the name of the other one. And there's some French regions in the northeast that can really get in contact with Île-de-France, because they can help Île-de-France to move into hydrogen technologies. It's just about making the linkages, establish collaboration networks with that region in order to make that happen, right? So now I go to global value chain. So now we use this type of framework actually to see to what extent also we can apply this to the global value chain literature. And then we pose the question, which the global value chain literature cares a lot, is about to what extent can regions improve their ability to move up the value chain and move into new value chains. And does that depend on the type of capabilities that are present in a region, right? So this is the relatedness approach that I was talking about before. Now, it's a big topic, and most studies are being done at the national scale, but going at the subnational scale will face you with a lot of data issues, right? So because the input-output data that are used for this type of analysis are not that yet regionalized, or at least these are not very disaggregated data at the industry level, for example. So you face a lot of constraints in order to really do the type of analysis I was talking about before. So it's very much connected to the world input-output data, and Groningen colleagues in my own country, like Marcel Timmer and Bart Loss, that are actually working on that and making those data available. And every year the data get better and better and better. And I'm sure in 10 years from now, if I'm still around, I could have a presentation here, and I'm sure we will have very good data in order to do this. Now we are a bit struggling with the type of data that are at hand, but what we want to see is to what extent we can actually move into certain tasks as a region within global value chain. And this is much more about functional specialization, as they refer to it, than industry specialization or technology specialization, as I talked about before. Because a region can still be specialized in one particular industry, let's say computers, but it matters very much on what kind of task it is performing within that computer industry, right? So you might have, you're doing a very high complex task, which means R&D, research and development. If you master that type of capabilities, you might have more value added attached to that. Or you can also, in computer industry, you might just stick to very simple production facilities, low complex activities that might not bring that much value added. But still, of course, you can still benefit from that in terms of the jobs that it will provide. Okay, next slide. So, so we were thinking about, and this is very recent work, about how to incorporate this kind of global value chain research into our research agenda, and especially on this relatedness approach that I was talking about before. So it means that you go, you focus on new economic activities, not anymore on new economic activities, but rather on new tasks and functions within global value chains. So it means that you need to develop a relatedness framework that can explain why a region is capable of moving into what we refer to as new industry functions and excel in that. Okay, next slide. So it means that the value chain concept becomes a dependent variable, right? You take the region industry function as the unit of analysis. So for example, R&D in laptops in a region, right? That is the unit of analysis. And you're gonna see to what extent the regions are capable of developing new industry functions in the region in which they were not yet specialized, right? So if they are successful in doing that, and they have the relevant capabilities to do so, then the relatedness framework becomes very applicable to study that. And you might go into a new value chain that has been referred to as horizontal upgrading. So for example, you move from mobile phones to laptops, or you enter into a new function into existing value chain. And a quite common distinction is then to distinguish the functions like R&D, management, marketing, logistics, and production. And you can add complexity levels to each of those functions and to each of those value chains. So the new functions refer to more virtual upgrading, right? You try to upgrade yourself within existing value chain. What you also do in that respect is to add complexity to the analysis, right? Because we have the relatedness complexity framework that we want to apply. And then we're going to look to see the industries that are involved in value chain. We can define them from high complexity to low complexity. And we can look at the functions within global value chain. And we can also define them as high complex versus low complex. So then you actually can apply the relatedness and complexity framework to study the ability of regions to move into new value chain, depending on the relevant capabilities that are needed to do so. Okay, next slide. Yes, so that means that when I was talking about defining the degree of relatedness between technologies, and we got such a technology space, you're right, you remember that nice network that I showed before. Now the unit of analysis becomes industry functions. And we define a relatedness measure that is based on geographical co-occurrences, right? So if two industry functions are combined at the regional scale, and you see that combination popping up at a very high frequency, that must have something in common, right? So, and that's why two industry functions will be defined as being related. So that's why you build a network. Is there a network next? Yes. So what you could do then is that each node stands for an industry function. And if there's a link between two industry functions, they're being related. If there's no link between two industry functions that are not related, right? It's the same like a technological space that I showed before, but here we show an industry function space. Okay, next slide, please. So this has implications, right? So what we did, a paper with Eduardo, but I'm sure that Eduardo will say a bit more also, yes, on this. We want to explain the ability of regions to develop a new industry function depending on the degree of relatedness within existing industry functions in the region. So in which industry functions you already specialized. And if you want to develop a new industry function, so you, for example, you want to go in R&D in laptops, is that industry function very much related to the existing industry function in which the region is already specialized, right? It's the same type of reasoning. And you can estimate two models then to explain that ability of regions to diversify into a new industry function. It's about functional upgrading, right? So then regions are more likely to develop complex functions in global value chains that are related to functions in which they're already specialized. So you move up the ladder within global value chain. And functional diversification is to move into new value chains, right? So you go from laptops to computers, right? So, or laptops to mobile phones. So you, as I said, not an easy job to do. I'm sure Eduardo will tell a lot about that. We used data for 249 AU NUTS2 regions from 24 AU countries and 16 non-AU countries, which allowed us to compute the value added content of the gross export produced by each regional industry. So we really could map those regional value chain in Europe, but we didn't have very detailed data on that. If I recall, yes, we had 4 industries, so not that many. But within each industries, we could identify a range of occupations like managers, researchers, etc., within each industry in order to look at industry functions. Yes. So what we did, I already said that. Let's go to the next one. Then you get really this nice functional global value chain space. Okay, I just asked clarification to Eduardo because I couldn't open my files this morning to read about it. This should be one network, right? So which you have the functional global value chain space in Europe. So you can actually see which industry occupations are actually related and which ones are not. And we use that as an input then to estimate to what extent regions in Europe actually have the ability to move into new industry functions in the global value chain. Okay, next slide, please. So the functional upgrading part is just a dummy variable which takes the value 1 when a region becomes specialized in a new industry occupation, when it achieves a new specialization in that, while in the previous period it was not yet specialized. So it develops a new specialization in an industry occupation. For functional diversification, it's the same, but then you take more the horizontal dimension of upgrading. Okay, next slide, please. So here are the the results. So this is at least what I could get out of my laptop this morning, and that is the upgrading model. That is the dependent variable. So to what extent are you capable of moving into a new industry function within existing value chain? The relatedness density is our key variable of interest. Right, so, and you can actually see that in all specification is always positive and significant. So actually it means, yes, you need to have relevant capabilities to functionally upgrade your value chain at the regional scale in Europe. So this was a good and a nice result. Next slide, please. And we did the same for diversification. So your ability of a regions to move into a new value chain, does that depend on relatedness with existing industry occupation? And indeed, the relatedness density variable is still very positive and significant. So it says you cannot just diversify into any new industry occupation. No, you need to have relevant capabilities because, again, they provide opportunities, but they set also limits to what can be achieved to upgrade existing value chains and to move into new value chains. So we also looked at this paper. This paper is rich, but again, I couldn't open my files this morning, so I had many more slides which I could show. So I had to do it very briefly. But we also not only looked at functional upgrading, but also at functional downgrading, right? So you can also lose a complex part of your value chain because you're outcompeted by others. So we also estimated not only entry models, but also exit models. And what we actually could conclude is that the relatedness approach is again very relevant, because if you don't have very strong relevant capabilities, you're more likely to lose parts of your value chain because those are not very rooted, they're not very much embedded in your own region. And if they are a bit disconnected from all your other activities, you're more likely to lose them at some point of time, and therefore you will there will be a downgrading process in terms of global value chain development. So I think that is also an interesting result in which this relatedness framework actually tends to be very applicable and promising to apply. I think the next slide, is that the last one? Yes, so what we try to do, and I think here it's very much work in progress, but the first results are pretty promising that we can actually apply this type of framework to global value chain development at the subnational scale. And our first result, indeed, that it is very promising, that in the sense that you need certain relevant capabilities. You cannot just diversify into any new value chain or upgrade an existing value chain without taking into account the type of capabilities that are present in the region. Okay, I'll leave it to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron. Very inspiring to all of us, and I guess in particular for students. I'm sure there are lots of questions also for clarification, but please keep the question with you that we move to the next presentation. If I have it, should be this one, right? So Eduardo, the floor is now yours, and you make a connection between global value chain and climate change.
Yeah, can you hear me well? Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Eduardo Hernandez from Utrecht University. I'm really happy to be here to share with you this work in progress. So that means that feel free to ask any clarification, any question, interrupt me. Also, I should be able to understand Italian. So if you feel better asking or something or whatever in Italian, please do so. And yeah, since Ron already have a look already to this story about how regions upgrade or functionally upgrade in value chains, here we are moving more in the climate change story. And with this piece of research, we want to look more on the environmental unintended consequences that might arise from this functional upgrading in GVC, with a special focus on greenhouse gases emissions. So we are talking more about air quality here in this case. And yeah, before maybe going to the topic, just wanted to ask you something. So to give a little bit of context, how many of you here do have an iPhone? If you have, please raise your hand. Okay, almost the half, I would say. And can some of you tell me where was produced your iPhone? If you have an iPhone or you don't, but maybe you have any idea where it's coming from? China? But then the headquarters of Apple might be in Silicon Valley, right? So yeah, I don't know. Indeed, it's a tricky story, and this is a very classic example in global value change, in which it's actually quite difficult to disentangle where something was actually produced, right? Because the software, the design of the iPhone might came from the US. We have here David, which is close to that area. But as you said, maybe in China, there was a lot of, let's say, assembling, packaging, transporting, logistics, these kind of things, right? So it's quite difficult to actually state where something was produced. And I remember before it was really something to see in a product, okay, this is made in Italy, in Germany, in China, whatever. Now it's more like by adding different production stages in different places where you obtain a product. So it's quite difficult. And the different functions that Ron was referring before are usually carried out in different places, right? So this is where the story of functional upgrading takes place, right? We don't want maybe to just be the guy that is just assembling the pieces. We want to be the one that is actually creating the idea behind the product, which is actually adding the real value added to your region or your country. So how did we arrive to this situation? Mainly three factors of the fragmentation of production processes. So first of all, the decrease on transport costs. Now it's very cheap in a way to move products around the world. This along with favorable trade policies, especially after the Second World War, trade openness, and it's very, very easy to trade between countries and regions. And very recent, like the rise of ICTs, which allow us to communicate with others in any place in the world, which is easy. This is particularly the case in the EU. So that's because we have this internal market. So in principle, it will be as easy to trade within the European Union than to trade within Italy or to trade within the certain region. This is still not perfect, but I think we are going to this direction. And that's why also the European regions, as Ron said before, and in this paper, we're also looking to European regions. It's a good case to actually see the fragmentation of production processes is actually quite easy. So there's this debate on, okay, how can we develop new value chains? How can upgrade the existing one? How can avoid downgrading the global value chains we already have? That's something that cover more Ron's presentation. And yeah, a question we had after this was, okay, but this economic upgrading in the value chains came with any cost? And we thought about the potential environmental. Here we refer to downgrading that we will have a look more in detail later. So does it actually coming with a cost? So what we want to do with this piece of research is actually to have a look to this potential dilemma that can arise between functional upgrading in the value chains and the environmental downgrading that can be produced. We are doing this following this economic complexity framework that is coming from evolutionary economic geography, as Ron said before. So actually trying to integrate the GBC literature and evolutionary economic geography together, also in this crossroads in climate change related literature, which is something that is growing a lot in GBCs, but also in economic geography. And doing this at the regional level, because we also acknowledge the regional heterogeneity that might arise from different regions. I mean, here we are in Italy, and I think you are really aware, and also Spanish, so we know that we have a lot of regional disparities, so it's not the same of the north of Italy here, Lombardy, cannot be maybe comparable with some regions in the south, which is also the case, for example, in Spain. And that's something also really interesting to have a look to the regional level instead of the national one. So let's have a look to the different concepts that are crucial to understand the story here. First, the global value chains, and particularly the concept of upgrading. Here we have a very good definition by Elisa Giuliani, Carlo Pietrovelli, and also Roberta Ravelotti on what is upgrading. And they define upgrading as making better products, making them more efficiently, or moving into more skill activities. So basically the literature differentiated 4 different kinds of upgrading. Product upgrading, which is actually making better products, as Ron maybe said before, okay, we are doing now computers, and we want to, or you are actually producing bicycles, we want to produce cars. So actually you want to produce a more complex, in this sense, product. The process upgrading is still you are doing the same thing, but you are doing it in a more efficient way. So you are actually gaining expertise in a sense, and you are actually improving the process of making this. And functional upgrading, which is the concept we focus here, is moving to more skill activities, right? So it's more like, okay, we are actually doing the assembling of the iPhone. We don't want this anymore. What we would like to do is actually to, I don't know, to try to do the design of the iPhone, to do the R&D, to actually develop the software behind this. And that's what is called functional upgrade. Then you also have the intersectoral upgrade. Here we again focus on just upgrading in this particular paper. In the other one, we also have a look to downgrading, although we didn't discuss about it. But it's true that also the literature has received less attention. So traditionally, in the global value chains literature, the way of measuring functional upgrading and downgrading has been following this smiling curve setting, in which you can order the different production stages on time, and also regarding the value added that you generate. So basically moving from manufacturing to design, or from manufacturing to distribution, might be a form of functional upgrading in the sense that you're actually adding value added. Since we think that we have some metrics in evolutionary economic geography that can actually give more nuances to this kind of traditional frameworks, and that's when the economic complexity story came in place, because you can actually order the production functions in the value chains using economic complexity metrics, which gives you, we think, a more nuanced picture that has been done before with the smiling curve, is what we are trying to propose in a sense. And then we came to the climate change literature, which is a huge field. I think here, if we have people in the PhD program on sustainability, these topics, they know that this is a huge field. So here we just focus maybe on the link of climate change literature with the GBC's economic complexity parts of the literature. First of all, with the GBC, we see an increasing importance in the literature. You can see very recent reference in a way, because GBC literature has been focused, largely on economic upgrading and economic downgrading. So basically, as Ron was saying before, the story of upgrading was more about, okay, value added, how you can actually do better in terms of economics. But then you also have some other dimensions, like can be social upgrading or the social implication of GBCs in terms, for example, of the workers' conditions and these kind of things. And now recently also paying attention to the environmental dimension, right? So, okay, how the way you actually integrate in global value chains might also affect the environment around us. So actually there is a need in the literature, a call in the literature. So actually, okay, it's great that we have a look to the economic upgrading, but we also might consider the environmental implication of that, because then we might end up with this environmental downgrading that we can observe, and some papers actually showing that while you do better in terms of economy, you might do worse in terms of the environment. This also has been partially covered with economic complexity, and here there is not a clear relationship in a way. So you have basically a study that points out that, okay, the way you move up in complexity, you actually do better in the environment, or the other way around. It also depends on which kind of economic complexity you measure. Here we talk about value added and global value chain perspective, but previously has been mostly using export data, patent data, as also Ron showed us before. So it's also something, and it's a big debate in the economic complexity community. We have a workshop in a couple of weeks in Utrecht on these topics, like if we need to actually limit economic complexity to actually be aware of the environmental implication that we might generate. And so on and so forth. They have also other lines of literature that I just wanted to mention, because I think are also important for this. The role of multinational, especially when they go in the governance of the value chains, how they actually impact the environment. There's a growing literature in this, and also on foreign direct investment, and especially the field of greenfield foreign direct investment is something also that is attracting a lot of attention. And it's actually trying to see how the foreign investment that you are receiving in your territory might help you to actually leverage on environmental consequences. And this is, let's say, all the literature backing us in this sense, but there is also something, and this is actually a picture I took yesterday evening here in Pavia, which I think was a demonstration, right, for climate change. So at the end of the day, it's also something that not only the academic or literature or the scientific literature is calling us to actually have a look into, but it's also something for us, like I think as a society, something important to actually start thinking more on these kind of things. So this is all great, but let's talk more about what specifically we did. First, the hypothesis we have before going to the analysis. And we wanted to test it two things. So absolute terms and relative terms. The first hypothesis referred to the absolute terms. So actually we expect the regions moving up in the value chains as measuring with economic complexity. They also increase their total greenhouse gases emissions. So basically when you move up in the value chains, you might actually incorporate new functions in your production process in your territory. That is usually also related to energy consumption. So that's actually kind of the way that you are moving up, you are also consuming more energy, you might be ended up polluting more. Then you also have this kind of idea of decoupling, which is a way of, okay, you might grow and you might pollute more, but maybe you generate more output than pollution. So it's kind of, you are being more efficient generating pollution in a way. So it's actually the relative kind of hypothesis. We have two different relative measures. We first have the greenhouse emission intensity per unit of output. So actually dividing the total emissions by the GDP of the region, and the emissions per capita, which again is actually dividing the total emissions by the total population. Expecting both sense still a positive relationship, although here it's not that clear, as I said before, because of this decoupling concept, which is so again a big debate, right? Because still you might be more efficient generating pollution, but at the same time you are generating pollution. So it's not clear to what extent what you want actually to do is actually reduce emission or just being more efficient in a sense. For the data on the global value chains, we use the same data that we use in the first paper with that Ron presented before. First of all, what we needed is value added of industries. And for that, we relied on EU-REGIO, which is an interregional input-output tables that allows us to actually compute the value added generated by each industry for the period 2000 to 2010. And then we wanted to distribute this value added into the different occupations that are developed in that industry. For that, we include, we use microdata from the European Union Labor Force Survey, which gives you the number of workers developing a certain occupation in a certain industry. And we basically use this to actually divide the value added. But there was a problem because some occupations require more people than others. For example, people working in a factory are usually more than, let's say, the manager, because you only have one manager, but you have a lot of workers. So in order to compensate for that problem of the number of people, we use microdata from the EU Structure of Earnings Survey, which includes the wage of each occupation, and we use the share of wages to actually distribute the value added. On the greenhouse gases emissions, we use this data from NAFKI 2021 on decoupling trends of emission across EU regions and the role of environmental policy, which was published in Journal of Clean Air Production. And what they actually do in this paper is actually to match the data from EDGAR database, which is a database on emissions developed by the European Commission Joint Research Center, in which they have the data on geographic grids. So basically what they did in the paper is match these grids into the regional boundaries, so the administrative borders of regions, to actually get the emissions per region and year. Here we consider 3 different greenhouse gases, which are the 3 main components. We use carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrogen dioxide, which still I'm trying to get more or less familiar with for what they came from, what they pollute, in which sense. But we know for sure is that actually these are the 3 main components of greenhouse gases. And I think it's also more rich than just consider CO2, which is also a classic measure in that sense. But here we are incorporating more, let's say, the greenhouse gases at a group instead of one by one. So this is how does it look. The quality of the image, maybe not the best, but yeah, we can see actually it's interesting that I'm presenting this in the north of Italy, because I think actually for what I know, Pianura Padana and this area is actually quite polluted. And here, when it comes to CO2, it actually reflects this phenomenon. Also interesting that some regions, like for example, Ile-de-France, as Ron referred before, so it's the Paris region. But what we don't see exactly is the clear core periphery kind of division that we might see afterwards in the global value chain complexity, which is much more clear. Here there is more like kind of heterogeneity in terms of CO2. Let's move to the complexity here. Andrea told us not to be too boring talking about methods here, but and yeah, don't worry about the equations. Just to have an idea what we mean by economic complexity, in this case, functional complexity, because indeed it sounds complex for the first time. It's not very clear to understand maybe for the first time. Let's have a really small example. Okay, here, all people in the room, we can probably, I don't know, clap the hands, we can walk, we can speak, we can hear, we can see. But not everyone in the room can maybe program with Python, or not everyone in the room can actually speak Chinese. So we will consider someone, a person in this case, to be complex when it's diversified. So when it can do many things that almost everyone can do, but it can also do some things that not everyone can actually do. So that's the way of defining the complexity in the sense. When it comes to regions and GBC, it's quite similar. So a region will be considered as functionally complex when it's actually developed a lot of functions in the global value chains, but among which these functions, there are some functions that not everyone can do. So are really specific and not really easy to be copied with other people. So that's a way of measuring the complexity in this sense. And here we can see the complexity that I just referred to. Here we have two maps. I don't know why I include two. One is 2000, year 2000, the other is 2010. They are quite similar, honestly. So, but maybe just to give the impression of what we see here is much the core periphery I was referring before, right? So we see actually France, Germany, Ireland being highly complex. When it comes to Italy, north of Italy is more complex. When it comes to Spain, Madrid is really highly complex, which makes sense. Also, it's Lisbon in Portugal. So it's basically much more what you expect, right? So these regions are the ones that are actually carrying out the most, let's say, complex part of the value chain. So they develop a lot of functions in the value chains, and also a lot with the value added, with maybe also the R&D, design, financial intermediation, and this kind of functions. So basically, now we came to the model we implemented. It's a simple two-way fixed effect model in which we have as a dependent variable the greenhouse gas emissions in logarithm form. We ran 3 regressions for each one of the hypotheses. So the first one will be just the total greenhouse gas emissions. And then we in absolute terms, and then we have the relative term, which will be the same, but just having the intensity per unit of output. So dividing the greenhouse gases by the GDP, and intensity per capita. So dividing the greenhouse gases per total population. The main variable of interest will be the complexity of the region here as a whole. A bunch of controls that we can have a look afterwards. And we also have time and region fixed effect. So let's have a look to these preliminary results. And I highlight these are preliminary results. So we have to be cautious on them. What we find for the total greenhouse gases emissions is a positive and significant effect, in which, okay, the higher the complexity of region have, so when it moves up in the value chains as generating more economic complexity, the higher is the total greenhouse gases emissions. Here in this case, and also for the 2 other regressions, we control for total population, population density, GDP per capita, an indicator of global value chain participation, patents application, agricultural share in terms of value added generated over the total economy, the same with manufacturing, and the education of the region in the sense of people having tertiary education. So this is absolute and total emissions. When it comes to intensity per unit of output, still the result is positive and significant, but here I'm much more cautious, especially because the sign flips from negative to positive. So that can be also a sign of what I was telling before of this decoupling kind of thing, in which, okay, we know that the emissions are going up and also the GDP, but maybe the pace that the production is having is actually higher than the emissions. So that might be the case that actually could be the case that you actually pollute more, but as you grow economically, you become more, let's say, efficient in your emission. But yeah, in this sense, I will be more cautious than before. Per capita, we're still positive and significant, although, yeah, here we don't have any flip of sign or whatsoever. Yeah, meaning also because we are here talking about a period of 11 years. So also the population has not a lot of variation. So that maybe also be the explanation of this kind of results. So just to briefly to conclude, to show the next step that we're planning to follow. What we find in the preliminary results is that, yeah, in principle, we find a positive relationship between upgrading in the value chains and this environmental downgrading measured as higher emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, both in absolute terms and relative terms, as I said before, although with the relative terms, I may be more cautious in a way, and much more work needs to be done here to actually try to understand this, maybe the decoupling story that can be there. But for sure, something is there. And we need to actually take into account these potential and intended environmental consequences of upgrading in value chains, which is something that actually the literature already is calling for that. And in this sense, we actually kind of agree with it. So the next step we are planning to do is, first of all, explore different variables because here we are just talking about air quality, greenhouse gases, but the literature has reflected along there are other many things that might be important for the environment in terms of biodiversity, for example, water quality, forestry areas, these kind of things. So it might be good to actually to check for other different variables on climate change and environmental performance besides just air quality. Also, to exploit the regional heterogeneity, because here we are just taking Europe as a whole, but as we said before, maybe the case that yeah, there are differences by GDP, for example, or by economic complexity, or even by level of emissions. So maybe a subsampling or something like that could be something to be exploited. Also, robustness check use maybe an alternative measure of economic complexity, other specification, other controls, or these kind of things. And especially very important, I think, for the future of this work is actually to develop more the potential public policy implication, because at the end of the day, what we want to actually do is to provide guidance to policy and to actually say, okay, functional upgrading, economic upgrading, global value change has been demonstrated to be good for the economies, but also we need to actually take care of this kind of aspects, of environmental aspect in a sense. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much. Yeah, looking forward to the debate, questions, or whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. And once again, also Ron, for introducing this topic. It is all very inspiring and also very challenging. So here we see a real evolution of literature. We see two bodies of the literature that try to bridge between each other, but at the same time venture into new fields and connect global value chain, broadly speaking, innovation to climate change. So as academics, we are also more aware of the damages we do also in investigating certain social events, and and being more aware, we try to look not only at the positive externalities of innovation, but also at the negative one, as you have seen. Try to claim that it's good to enter into global value chain, but of course there is also not only the bright side, but also the other side of the coin. So I'm sure this was for some of you new concept and new methodologies, very obscure perhaps, but we have in a way plenty of time for questions. So we have about 20 minutes. So feel free to raise your hands. Also, people that are from home, please just step in. And for those who want to make question here in the room, since there are people also at home, unfortunately, I have to ask you to come here to the desk and ask question from here. Anyone who wants to break the ice? Of course.
Thank you very much. I mean, having been work on global value chain for a long time, it's quite interesting for me what you are doing. I have many questions, but I mean, something which really I would like to ask Eduardo. I mean, your hypotheses to me are, I would think about an hypothesis in exactly the opposite way you are posing the question, because I mean, in terms of functional upgrading, to me it means moving, as you have shown, it means moving up to function. We tend to be less energy intensive, and in fact I'm not surprised at all about your result, but your second result, because I mean, if you move up from manufacturing to research and development, usually this will be energy intensive, and all the, I mean, if you look at the GVC literature, about environmental upgrading, the main point is, the main problem with global value chain, and there is also this literature about trying to measure where GVC are producing emission. And the point is, with global value chain, you move the most polluting activities to developing countries, and developing countries are these emissions are attributed to developing countries, but in fact, I mean, China is producing emission for producing iPhone, but iPhone are consumed in Italy or in the US. So I don't really understand your hypothesis, I must say.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's really related to what economic complexity capture in a way. So measuring upgrading with economic complexity, because I said before, it's about diversity and ubiquity. So when we said you are moving up the value chains, what I'm not saying is that you are becoming a specialized in more complex things, but you are not necessarily becoming unspecialized in less complex things. You know, so it's actually adding more complex things to the things you already have. So that's the way that the economic complexity might be captured, in the sense that you are diversified, so you can still do many things in the production process, among which you are incorporating more complex things, but it's not that moving up the value chain in the sense I was doing manufacturing, now I'm doing R&D, and I'm not doing the manufacturing. It's not the way it's economic complexity capturing it. It's more by adding new functions to the already present one, in a sense. So that might be the case, that actually what you are basically saying is that you are not per se transforming your economic structure. You are transforming in the sense that you are getting more things on top of what you have, but it's not necessary that you still have the manufacturing, for example, even though you also develop the R&D. So you are getting more activities in a sense. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So any other question for clarification? There must be one, otherwise I had to pick some of you randomly. So please go ahead. Also from home, I know there are a few PhD here who know much more about climate change that we do. So please take a chance to raise your voice, speak up.
Hello, can you hear me? So I wanted to ask for a personal opinion. Would you say that all the development of the economy in general is worth it, the greenhouse gas emissions? Because for me, it sounds like we are exploring more economic race, but do we have something we get back to improve our greenhouse emissions? Oh. Yeah, is it working?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's very challenging in a way question, as you said, right? I think it also depends who is answering the question, right? Because I mean, for us, in which we already have a kind of level of economic development, okay, we care about these kind of things, but if you maybe go to a less developed country, I think priority number one will be just grow economically, so do better economically, so get better the populations, no? I don't know, Roberta knows more about this than me for sure, but yeah, I mean, it's as a personal thing, I don't know, like really tough question. I think it's you want to say something, Andre? No.
Perhaps Ron, you want to add up something to these questions?
paper on green. Well, I won, but it's always a bit tricky, right? If you enter a new field, well, there's so much literature around, so I'm always a bit skeptical. Also, actually going into the global value chain literature, right, in which I did not work a lot on before. And when you browse through a literature like that, it's so rich, and it is so there are so many things already being said. So you always have to be a bit careful. No, I mean about the environment. I think what is very let's put it a bit more in general. So the type of questions that we are very much interested in is to what extent there is structural change going on in the economy, and you can apply it to that to any topic, and that can be also applied to the green transition, right? So so to what extent are we capable to move into more green, right? And whatever that is, I mean, green is has so many dimensions. We tend to look at technologies. Actually, I just completed a report on that for the European Commission on the twin transition. This is now very fashionable to do. So you will hear a lot about that in the next coming years, not because I'm working on it, but the European Union really likes the idea. And what they want to do is then to see to what extent we can really move into the green transition by about the circular economy, right? About hydrogen, about batteries. Those are all considered to be very important technologies to make that happen. And where should we focus our investments? And we are geographers, especially we are interested in what type of places that might be done. And then I think, and maybe I'm a bit naive in these kind of things, but I'm pretty optimistic. And I certainly don't go only for a technology-driven approach, but I think technologies matter quite a lot. Think about solar energy or wind energy that we are all implementing right now. It's based very much on technological developments that have been done in the past. So, of course, there's much more to say on that by just looking at technologies. But it's about structural change and making sure that parts of your economy that are more environmental friendly become larger, right? So that we get rid of the non-renewables, that we move into renewables, and that and in that sense we can already make an impact. And there are many ways of looking at that. So that's probably what I should say.
Excuse me. Thank you very much for coming here to speak about something important topics like the climate change in this case and the global value chains. I would like to focus particularly on the ecological transition. I think the professor has mentioned it previously, and maybe, yeah, how to answer to climate change. For example, it could be possible to take into consideration all the opportunities that we have to answer to a difficult situation like the climate change. For example, I don't know, the renewable energies that maybe I think the developed countries before have started to develop, and now also in developing countries on which we are trying, maybe is the focus of our study in the magistrate. I would only to ask if in his idea, the renewable energies could be a good answer, a good opportunity for climate change.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's something really important. I mean, I know that Ron has done more on, let's say, already green innovation, right? But from my perspective on this piece of work, I mean, something we control for is actually patents application. Of course, maybe we can have a look more or try to include just the, let's say, green patent application in that sense, and how they contribute to all this story. So definitely something to really take into account. Is something that is shaping the future, and is something that a lot of papers and research is going into that direction. Maybe Ron, you want to add something on green innovation?
Yeah, as I said, I mean, yes, a lot of work on green technologies, but I've also seen papers on green jobs, right? So that, of course, is a kind of nightmare to really operationalize it. What is a green job? That what people tend to look at is the type of work task that you perform. Right. So, and for example, I'm a scientist, right? So I might have 25 work tasks that I do. I'm now here. I could have done it online. So this type of work task that I'm doing right now is very environmental unfriendly, because I had to take a flight from the Netherlands and then take a train, etc. So you see, so people are now trying to estimate, okay, how much kind of pollution can be associated with certain types of work tasks. So I've seen papers on that that have been applied in the US, and then they look at the spatial distribution of green jobs. I think Davide Consoli, for example, has done some work on that, who's located in Ingenio in Valencia. I think it's still very much work in progress, right? So because okay, for some activities it's more obvious, right? Like wind energy industry. Okay, then we can almost all agree that wind energy can be associated with a green activity. Although then people are saying, yeah, the way they are produced might not be that environmental friendly, right? So if you have to bring together all the inputs that come from everywhere in the world, again, the way they are produced is not that environmental friendly, although wind energy is considered to be a green activity. In the European Union, think about the fact that nuclear energy is considered green, right? So they have now a definition of in the new Green Deal, and nuclear energy is a green technology. So there's a lot of debate on that, a lot of controversy, so it's not that easy, right? So when we try to measure things, we like to measure things. I mean, that is part of our job. But those are really wicked issues that are not easy to solve. But at least people are trying to work on and trying to make progress. But we are just in the middle of that. So if you really want to contribute to this type of literature, I mean, you're very much welcome to join that effort, because there's so much work to be done on this. We really need good data, right? And good empirical research in order to help policymakers to go for the right environmental policy.
Okay, well, we are getting close to the end. I don't know if from home there is any other question. Perhaps we can just pick one.
Yes, hello.
Yes, hello.
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both for your presentations. I wanted to ask to Eduardo something related to the first result. So this positive relationship between functional upgrading and environmental downgrading. And is, I don't know if we can do this, but let's say that we can, or it's a question actually, can we say that functional upgrading can be used as a proxy for innovation, for example, and therefore kind of conclude that innovation leads to environmental downgrading, and therefore kind of contribute to this new literature that I don't know if you're aware of, the dark side of innovation, in a sense that saying that innovation has also this dark side? This question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. You know, indeed, the dark side of innovation is really a really exciting topic, and it's developing quite quickly in the sense. Here in this case, yeah, I wouldn't dare to actually claim anything related to innovation, in the sense that here this metric is basically based on value added contribution. So it's actually based on the contribution of value added by each occupation and industries. So it may be something good to look at more in detail to the innovation related literature, but for sure the metric here we are using is, I cannot say it's related at all with innovation. Of course, innovation, as we were discussing before, may play a role here, but from these first preliminary results, it's not something I will claim. Although, yeah, indeed, it might be something really to have a look into that and maybe to explore a little bit more in more detail. So, yeah, thank you very much for the question and the suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for being here. Thanks for questions. I just want to remind all of you that this has been recorded and you will find it on the YouTube channel of the university. So if you just want to look at it again or you want to share it, please feel free to do it. Okay, just as conclusion, this is important stuff. As Ron was saying, it's important for you, your new generation, to work on it. It might be tough, but I guess all of you have the motivation for that. And linking just to the last question about dark sides, clearly economics, innovation, global value chain as well have many dark sides. We as scholars have been looking at the bright side for many years, and we are becoming ourselves more concerned at the dark side of all these phenomena. Okay, thanks again, and see you in the next lecture. And thanks also for the others at home.